If you have questions during the presentation, you can type them out in your Zoom control panel or raise your hand. We'll bring them up during the presentation, but we'll also have time for questions at the end where you can unmute and ask questions. If you would like an accessible version of today's presentation, you can send me an email. We'll also actually be sending it to everyone who registered, and we'll also be sending a copy of the recording to everyone who's registered. So with that, let's go into a very brief introduction about my company. I'm with Continual Engine. We are an award-winning AI technology company. We're dedicated to building smarter, affordable, and scalable solutions for learning and accessibility. Our solutions have been especially impactful in accelerating STEM accessibility. We have tested and trained our tools, and we'll briefly discuss our tool towards the end of today's webinar, but we basically have worked extensively with content providers, publishers, including Macmillan Learning and other organizations in training our tools to be very effective for STEM content. And we leverage sophisticated technologies like AI, deep learning, machine learning, and automation in combination with human experts such as subject matter experts and accessibility experts to achieve high quality STEM accessibility. So now, without further ado, I'm thrilled to hand it over to Rachel Comerford, who has graciously taken time out to join us today and share her insights and thoughts on STEM accessibility. So Rachel, over to you.
I'm going to go ahead and say that nobody has ever described me as gracious, so I will come back anytime, Vijay. Just to give you an idea of who I am, I'm the Senior Director of Accessibility, Outreach, and Communication at Macmillan Learning. We work together with a number of different organizations. One of our proudest achievements to date has been being the first accessible publisher that was certified by Benetech, and I see some familiar names, including at least one person from Benetech in our attendee list, so hello. I've worked over the years to become an accessibility and diversity champion within the company. So I manage a team that's dedicated to building accessible products. We remediate legacy products, and we do our best to create an accessible experience for every individual student. Just a little bit about Macmillan. So we're a family-owned leading global education publisher. As I said before, we pioneered a workflow for creating accessible ebooks that conform to the EPUB creation guidelines and the WCAG 2.0 AA standards. And all of our ebook content starting in 2019 is born accessible. And we're working very hard with a number of partners, including Tech for All, to make sure that all of our platform content is accessible as well. And all of our back-end platforms are accessible. We've made significant headway over the course of the last couple of years, and I'm excited to see what's to come.
Thanks, Rachel. So before we start the session, I wanted to briefly talk about our collaboration with Rachel and the Macmillan Learning team. So we met Rachel, I feel like a few years back, pre-COVID, at an accessibility conference. And we were talking about one of our automated solutions for alt text, Invicta. And we started really what we thought was the most challenging, which was STEM content. And we were at that time seeking a lot of feedback and insights from content providers and publishers. Rachel and her team provided a lot of important feedback and connected us with the community. And they've demonstrated such a deep commitment to accessibility and equitable education. It only seemed fitting to invite Rachel to present an introductory session on STEM accessibility. And again, what we really wanted to cover today was to set some context. This webinar is an effort to understand the importance of creating accessible STEM content from an accessibility champion. And as Rachel will, as we kind of get into the session, Rachel will talk about some introductory concepts, but today is not meant to be an in-depth education on STEM accessibility or a hands-on session. And I just wanted to clarify that so we kind of know what we're getting into before our session starts. And so we wanted this to be a conversation opener about this very important topic, and we'll potentially have more sessions in the future where we will dive into how to make STEM content more accessible. So with that, we're going to go into our first question to Rachel, and which is to learn a little bit about her background and Macmillan's background. So yeah, Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about when you got interested?
So I mean, I should say, poor Vijay first told me that this series was called Meet the Expert, and I was like, you're going to hate my first slide. One of the things that I like to start with is that I'm not an expert. And I think it's an important reminder. I'm not an expert in accessibility, and I'm not an expert in STEM. I stumbled into this. If you go to my next slide, very much like the stick figure on my slide, who is sliding through various icons used to represent disabilities. It is also worth noting that that is a really great image of me doing yoga. I was an editor for digital content as a publisher, and there were requests coming in from students. And I realized that there was a pretty significant gap in my knowledge. I understood how to put courses together. I understood how to make those courses look attractive. What I didn't understand was how to meet the needs of these students with disabilities. I think it's pretty easy for us to say that a goal is great content for students. But what I learned very quickly was that there was a forgotten student population, and that we weren't just not helping them, we were actively hindering them. What I know now is that 19% of students enrolled in an undergraduate institute report having a disability. This was the number in 2015, 2016, which sadly was the most recent research I could find. But the research does show that this is an increasing population. There are more and more students that are reporting having a disability. Additionally, there are a ton of students that can benefit from accessible content and platforms, and they don't even know that they're eligible for accommodations. So if you look at the area of mental health alone, this represents 1/3 of students with mental health disabilities. As somebody who has PTSD and depression, I really wish that I had known that there were resources for me when I was in college, and I hope that we get better at providing these resources to others. So every discipline is going to present unique challenges. STEM has traditionally been viewed as really difficult or scary, accessibility aside. And accessibility kind of has that same reputation. People think it's too difficult to do. They think it's too expensive. And in my mind, neither is true. We just need people who care about one to invest in the other. That's still pretty rare, but when it happens, we see a successful partnership between subject matter experts and accessibility subject matter experts. Those results are so rewarding. And that's really what I'm in it for.
Thanks, Rachel. And it's one of those pieces that we don't talk about in general. It's kind of bringing me to my next question, which is, what would you say is the current level of awareness on challenges with accessibility? And again, since we're focused today, I'm going to say STEM content accessibility.
I mean, it's high and low, right? So there's like really high awareness in some areas and low in others. And I hate giving the "it depends" answer, but I think that that's often going to be the case. I think there are plenty of people out there who are going to tell you about accessibility gaps in STEM materials. We know MathML doesn't work on every platform. If you look at caniuse.com, and there's a screenshot of caniuse.com, it's a wonderful resource for compatibility questions. And it shows us that multiple browsers still don't support MathML. We also know that MathML doesn't have full coverage of chemistry. And we know that ChemML, which exists, is very rarely implemented. We know that experimentation and serendipitous discovery can be really difficult to replicate in an accessible digital environment. We know that geological maps are really complicated. They have many layers, and they're meant to communicate lots of different types of information at once. So that list goes on and At the same time, I think that there is a widespread misconception that we can't make some of those materials more accessible. And in my mind, this is a can't versus a won't. So we've allowed the mythology of STEM being hard to overtake the opportunity to innovate. And too often I hear these disciplines approached as, we know the current material isn't accessible. We don't think the current material can be made accessible. And so we just need to accept that this is an exception and it's not going to be accessible. And there's an alternative approach. And we need to start encouraging people to approach these problems as we know the current material isn't accessible. So rather than try to remediate it, let's try to approach it from a different perspective. And that convincing people to remediate content can be difficult in its own right. Convincing people that they need to revisit the way that they're building content to accommodate a larger audience, that is a whole different barrel of monkeys.
Well said. Is this something that is frequently what we encounter when we work with, new companies that are just starting their journey, where there is this feeling or this, I would say, this fear of really stepping into STEM accessibility because they view it as something that's, too big to grapple and to really address. And so that kind of gets me to the next question, which is common misconceptions about STEM education. And one of it is that it's not for everyone, especially for learners with disabilities. We hear, and I think this is something I read frequently, about how learners with disabilities don't tend to prefer STEM. And this also allows, again, institutions, organizations, providers to explain why there is a lack of accessibility in STEM. What has been your experience and what are your insights on this region?
So you're right. We see this all the time. That type of ableism really gets to me. I am a woman who is also disabled. So I've been on the receiving end of this type of exclusion in more than one way. And this is a little bit off topic, but I needed to include it. There's a wonderful Twitter feed called The Man Who Has It All, where the deeply ingrained sexism of our culture sort of turned around on men. So the t-shirt pictured here is "I'm too handsome to do maths." And it's a favorite of mine because I relate so closely to that type of quote unquote compliment that also excludes. So the worst part for students with learning disabilities and a genuine interest in STEM is that the discouragement is often cloaked with concern, the same way that the discouragement for women has often been cloaked in complimenting. So students are asked questions like, are you sure that you're ready for this challenge? They're told that the materials are inflexible. They're told that programs are rigorous. We're actively discouraging these students. And in many cases, there are schools that see themselves as doing these students a favor by discouraging them. But a gentle push away from STEM is still a push. And even when those students make it over that softer reproach, even when they make it over the hump, they hit a harder barrier because then they enroll in these STEM programs and the materials that are being used to educate have also been built to exclude. They've been built assuming that these students will not take these courses. They've been built assuming that these students will not use these materials. And in the end, there are some who would argue this is a chicken and egg problem, right? But it's not. There's no question that there's interest in these fields. But in a lot of cases, the doors have just been shut on these students that are trying to get into the field. And that's something that we have to actively push back against.
Yeah, and that's something we also see a lot with explaining why the resources are not accessible in the first place. It's more seen as, let's do it if and when a student enrolls, rather than having it enabled from the beginning that it's easy for learners to enroll in whatever course they choose, especially with STEM content, looking at the content beforehand, I think makes a difference to how much students want to make a decision to enroll.
Yeah, we're really pushing for this idea of this like push left phenomenon or shift left phenomenon. Although I prefer pushing rather than shifting, but that's just my personality. That the idea that if we consider these questions at the beginning, then none of these questions, none of the things that we're trying to tackle right now are issues in the end. We don't have to worry about whether there are going to be students in the class that can't use the materials, because we built them to be inclusive for all of these students. So that shift left, born accessible idea is something that needs to be embraced. It's not just about humanities courses. It's not just about ebooks. It's about any educational content that we're creating.
Absolutely. And that is one of the areas that we talk about is, yes, there are, and you said that earlier in our conversation, that there are unique aspects to pretty much every discipline, every content type that does need to be addressed uniquely. And looking at STEM accessibility or STEM content, one of the things we hear about is it's particularly hard to tackle. And let's maybe just jump into that for a moment. So I'd like to understand from you, what do you think makes it particularly hard to tackle, maybe as compared to humanities or a qualitative discipline, if I can say that?
So I can speak to where I have found that there are the most challenges to tackle. And for me, the biggest frustration comes down to inconsistency in technology. So the most frustrating problems that arise in STEM for me are when we see an assistive technology, a browser, and an operating system all having inconsistent responses to content when they're brought together. It is infuriating. It's difficult for the people who are building, it's difficult for the people who are testing, and it's difficult for the users who purchase the platform or the content. So to me, this says that there is a need for international standards and best practices. It's very real. And the creation of those standards requires the participation of all organizations, not just in authoring standards, not in creating them, but in following them. And I mentioned MathML before. I think MathML is a really great example. We have a markup language that plays really well with assistive technology for math, but we still see platforms that just won't read it. I have a slide that covers just a few of the organizations that have been thinking about this, from IEEE to the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. There are also more local organizations, depending on where you're living. The Book Industry Study Group in the US has thought about some of these questions, as well as NNELS, the National Library Network in Canada, as well as BookNet in Canada. Those are some great examples. It's important to get involved in those conversations, to look at ways that we can implement those standards and implement them in the most consistent ways possible, so that we're giving our users an experience that they can rely on. On the content side, there have been quite a few theories about barriers in making material accessible, but I can tell you what I've experienced. One of the biggest barriers that I see in creating accessible education materials in STEM is trying to do too much in one tool. We love a silver bullet, something that's going to just solve all of our education problems. I think that sometimes in the name of innovation, we try to create education materials that cover a really broad range of topics and experiences. And while I will never discount the power of exploration and experimentation in learning, especially in STEM, we also need to design with purpose. So this means, as content creators, whether you're a professor, if you're a publisher, if you're an ed tech company, anyone, the first step in creating educational materials is knowing what problem you're trying to solve. and making sure that the solution addresses that problem. We all hear about scope creep, but you don't want to let the scope of the project get to the point where you're trying to solve every question in the STEM discipline at once. So if you focus on problem-solving skills like this, then the singular solutions that you create become building blocks for bigger ones. And this is where I shamelessly plug a Macmillan product, but what's on the screen is the Choose a Container menu for the Macmillan Learning Lab simulations. And the idea is we needed to break down the experience of a student being in a virtual lab environment to digestible chunks. We needed to be able to address the individual questions that students are going to be asking as they learn how to function in a lab environment. So, do students know how to identify different lab materials? Well, we've created a very simple menu. Everything is labeled, it's keyboard navigable, it has alt text attached to the images themselves have met contrast requirements, all of these things. So then we can move on to our next problem, which is, do they know how to operate a microscope? And so we try to tackle the different issues that a student might face when they're trying to use a microscope. Can they actually make out what's on the slide, or do we need to have a contrast adjustment or brightness adjustment? Does the student know what goes onto a slide and what to do with something once they take it off the slide? So then we get through that. And so then we think about, okay, well, the student is trying to get from choosing their microscope to choosing the items that are on the microscope, to navigating what they're learning about the microscope. So how are they getting from one place to another? Here's a new building block for our tool. So we're going to make sure that they can navigate it not just with their mouse, but with a keyboard. And is it a particularly complex experience? Yeah, I mean, they have a garbage can, they have a biohazard container, they have shelves filled with different supplies as they would in a laboratory. And so we're going to give them additional instructions about navigating with their keyboard, navigating with their screen reader to make sure that we're supporting that experience.
Yeah, and I was just pausing there to look at all of the different pieces on that particular slide. And it kind of brings my mind to thinking about just to, summarize what you're saying. And that's maybe my understanding of it, is to look at each piece to make sure it's accessible by itself, and then to look at the whole experience and make sure it's accessible for anyone who's navigating through it. So really tackling everything one at a time and then together. And that makes perfect sense. And it's really trying to break things down into simple steps so that it's, again, just, I guess it's not just an accessibility aspect, it's also a learning aspect. It becomes a learning aid in that process, right? That's how I would view it.
Yeah, and the questions that I like to ask are what are the goals of this particular activity? What are the goals of this particular step? And so I think very often we sort of take a look at STEM and we say, okay, the student needs to understand the entire lab experience. And that's huge. That is a massive question. You can't ask for a solution to that question, but what you can ask is, do the students know what safety equipment they need to have in order to be prepared for the lab? And that's your first question. That's their first step. That's your first problem to help them solve. And if you can solve that, well, you've created maybe a navigable menu, and you can recreate that experience for the other things the students need to choose. But you've started them on the journey of understanding how to function in a lab environment without having the physical barriers that are presented in some lab environments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really like that example. And it's a lot around the differences again. So I mean, stepping into documents specifically, and we deal with a lot of documents. In our line of work, we look at content, we look at content with equations, we look at content with figures, images, lots of those are like tackled pretty much, I would say, consistently on a regular basis. And then of course, the ideal situation would be to design everything to be accessible, but we're also looking at legacy content that was created before there was maybe awareness or knowledge about accessibility. And so we're hopefully we're taking steps in that direction. But if you're looking at STEM documents, would you say they require remediation in the same manner? Would you say there are key differences? Would you also maybe go on to say how you would address STEM accessibility differently? And these are like a few questions that I wanted to throw out.
So again, worst possible answer. It depends. So if you're just doing document remediation, you might need different tools depending on the format, depending on the content, but there are ways to test EPUBs, PDFs, Word documents. In some cases, they're built into the platform, like with Word or PDF. In other cases, you can access them independently. For EPUB, there's EPUB Check and ACE. Those tools don't change depending on the discipline. They're meant to address the document format overall. But also, every discipline is going to require a certain level of subject matter expertise. So if you have images, those images need to be described. Now, there are some images that you may not need expertise to describe. For example, the Macmillan Learning logo. My alt text for that would be the Macmillan Learning logo. But when it comes to describing a diagrammed sentence in the humanities, you will need a certain level of subject matter expertise to describe it. The same if you're trying to describe a molecular model. So every document is going to have that certain level of subject matter expertise. Every document is also going to need quality assurance testing. You need to know that it meets the accessibility requirements. You need to know that it meets your own personal formatting requirements. There's no document that can skip that process, no matter the discipline. And as long as I am shamelessly self-promoting, which is something that I seem to be getting very good at, there are a number of wonderful resources out there in terms of making documents accessible. I'm happy to point to others after this webinar, but Macmillan has partnered with Tech for All to make some of our documentation available for free on the Macmillan Learning accessibility site. That's macmillanlearning.com/accessibility. And what we've tried to do is take a lot of the things that we learned from the community around us and to pull that information together into these documents and checklists to share back out to the community as a part of being a member of that. And so there are some document accessibility elements in here, including PDFs and slides and documents. And so I encourage people to take a look and of course to contact us if they have questions or feedback, complaints. They're always welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. And the other piece is, right, when you're talking about an organization like yours and your team specifically, where you do have this deep commitment and passion and support for accessibility, let's maybe step out and say organizations that may not have the same potential, either resources or knowledge to be able to do that. And again, the goal is to think beyond, just, of course, we want to get to the ideal, but that's really about taking steps in that direction regularly, constantly. And so would you say STEM accessibility is something that's within the reach of, companies or individuals who may not have extensive training, may not have extensive familiarity in STEM disciplines? This is another question we encounter often, which is that, do you have the subject matter knowledge? Do you have the expertise to make STEM content accessible? Because it's, again, viewed as a very unique and challenging piece.
I mean, I'm particularly lucky in that the team that I work with right now, I have as colleagues STEM PhDs who are working on building this content, who are working on building these interactives, and so it's wonderful to have this reference immediately available to me. But do I think that it's within the reach of organizations that don't have that resource? I would say emphatically yes. One of the things that accessibility and STEM accessibility particularly needs right now are creative problem solvers. And a partnership with subject matter experts will certainly be necessary at some point, but there is this remarkably difficult skill to teach and to master, and that's getting to the core of what problems need to be solved, and then using that as the foundation for exploring solutions. So what we need are people who can talk to students, who can talk to instructors, who can hear about experiences, who can listen to frustrations, to hopes. You don't need to be a scientist to listen. And what we have right now is a dearth of our own education about student and instructor experiences in these fields.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And I think subject matter experts, we've been lucky as well because our organization is very focused on STEM, and we've had, the support of some, great internal team members, as well as just extensively when we work with the community. We see that there is a lot of excitement, interest, and passion to support. So I feel like when there is an interest to make STEM accessible, we've always found that there are resources, there are, the support groups, there are different ways that we've been able to kind of go in that direction. So here it kind of comes beyond just STEM accessibility, and which is to look at, STEM as, a discipline or an area where there's a lot of conversations around how can we expand enrollment in STEM, how can we expand careers in STEM. So one of my questions to you is, what do you believe are, perhaps some unintended consequences we may experience as we emphasize STEM accessibility?
Sorry, I think one of the most disturbing things that I heard early in my career in accessibility was the number of people who would tell me that accessibility is a limiter of innovation. And I will not accept that. I don't accept that argument. We've built an inaccessible world. And now we're having trouble imagining that there's an alternative. But we have this opportunity. We have this opportunity to share a broader number of people into our worldview, to include more and more into our understanding of who's going to use our environment, our products, whether it's digital or physical. And if we go back into non-STEM related content, like if we think about just a physical environment, what would have happened if we had defaulted to ramps instead of stairs, and then stairs became something that we added later as a backup for higher traffic areas? What would happen if we had subways that had written and audible announcements and alerts? What if is such a powerful question. And I think that we have the opportunity to ask it more and to have more people doing the asking. I think one of the things that we talk about a lot in terms of accessibility and the benefits that accessibility brings is that it doesn't just benefit people with disabilities, it benefits an entire population. I would go a step further than that. And one of the favorite books that I've read recently was Emily Ladow's Discovering Disability, I think it's called. Now I'm gonna look at the title on my bookshelf and find out I'm wrong. Demystifying Disability, that's what it is. And one of the things that she talks about is being temporarily abled. And the idea is that at some point in our life, disability will affect us, whether it's something associated with a temporary illness, broken bone, age-related eyesight or hearing loss. We are all likely to experience a disability in our lifetime. So the unintended consequence of STEM accessibility is that we have started to make a better world for ourselves as well, whether we identify as disabled or not.
Yeah, well said, Rachel. It's true. I think it's more likely that we will, if we live long enough and are here long enough, we will experience some type of temporary or, maybe not temporary participation in this community that is right now viewed as being, kind of different or outside, right? And I think it's more about like we are either flowing through it or we are part of this community all the time in so many different ways. So really thinking through just the lens of making accessibility or making innovations or making, building anything new really through the lens of all, through everyone, makes a huge difference to just how much has to be done later to, accommodate as we hear that all the time. I want to actually pause because we do have a question from Jayasudan on the Q&A panel, and I just want to see if we want to take that before we move into our next question. And I'm just going to read that out. He says, hello, thanks for sharing inputs. We are developing solutions to empower the deaf community in India, and hence wish to understand the status of STEM accessibility in US and India for hard of hearing and deaf students who use sign language as medium for learning, and what are offerings for them from Macmillan Learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are sort of two different routes in terms of accessibility in the deaf and hard of hearing community for education. What we can say, or what the most straightforward, I think, answer is if you have live lecturing, if you have recorded lecturing, if you have videos in your program, there needs to be, depending on whether it's live or recorded, closed or open captioning. That is a necessity to be provided, whether it's in the classroom or in a virtual environment. What we have also found is there are a lot of physical solutions that are being made available. And at Macmillan, we actually started exploring some of this for our own office space. Like, do we need conference rooms that are T-coil compatible so that it's easier for any of our employees with hearing disabilities to hear what's going on within our conference rooms. We also have looked into bringing in sign language interpreters for our town hall meetings so that the content is readily accessible to that community. The other thing that I would keep in mind is in STEM in particular, there have been a lot of interesting areas of exploration involving graphing and sound. And this is, of course, for people with visual disabilities. And one of the things that I think is important for us to consider as we head down that route is making sure that we're not providing information with that sound data that's not being provided with the visual data, so that we can make sure that we're meeting the needs of a wider audience.
Thanks, Rachel. Jed, did that answer your question? Yes. Okay, please let us know if you have a follow-up. We will have time for Q&A in just a few minutes as we wrap up our session here. And this, I believe, is our last question for this afternoon, which is how can we create or increase STEM interest among individuals with disabilities?
I would say it's the wrong question. I don't think that we need to increase interest. I think we need to increase access. Back to what I had said earlier, there's no lack of interest in STEM amongst individuals with disabilities, any more than the quote unquote lack of interest in STEM amongst women. But the opportunities have been limited. And we can change that in any number of ways, but not the least of which is to bring the disabled community into conversations. We need to talk to students who have disabilities. We need to talk to instructors. We need to talk to administrators. We need to talk to experts. We need to work with them to understand where they're being met with resistance to their contributions. And then we can work with them to tear down those barriers. But we have to get away from this idea that it's not something that a specific population wants to be involved with. We have to get away from the idea that women aren't interested in being involved in STEM. We have to get away from the idea that individuals with disabilities aren't interested in being involved in STEM, because if we don't accept that they are a part of this population, then we will never be able to include them in these resources.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. We actually, I want to open two questions from the audience. And Jay, you mentioned that you have a follow-up question. Feel free to type it out, or if you'd like to speak it out, raise your hand and I can unmute you. And briefly, I just want to, again, before we continue on to audience questions, just want to briefly talk about our own journey with building AI solutions for accessibility with a focus on STEM accessibility. So we started our journey about 5 years ago, where we were looking at, my personal background. I've worked with higher education institutions and publishers for a couple of decades. And at the time, we started to receive a lot of interest and questions around accessibility. And that's kind of when we started to look through the lens of how to make it more affordable, easy, faster, because we saw this as something that was really important to address from not just a human expert perspective, but also looking at where technology can play a big role in accelerating this whole journey. And our conversations with many industry experts, champions like Rachel, a lot of different people, kind of led us to understand that the two primary areas that continued to be a challenge were images and documents. So we started to really look at documents. First, we started to look at images. And at the time, everything was written in terms of alt text to describe images was really written manually. So we started to look at what can technology do here. And that's really how Invicta was born, which is an AI technology solution that automates the creation of descriptions, image descriptions or alt text. And it works for diverse images in STEM. We started with chemistry, math, accounting, but we've pretty much expanded to all STEM disciplines, including engineering, physics, statistics. Very happy for anyone who's interested, if you reach out, we're happy to share examples or provide a demo. And PREP is our second tool, which is also an AI-enabled tool that helps take documents and automatically tag them. And that makes it a lot faster and easier if you're dealing with, again, documents with a lot of complex content in them, like equations, things or images that are probably you rely on experts to provide you with some content. But here we are trying to make it easier for you to do it yourself. We do continue to include experts on our end, both content experts, subject matter experts, accessibility experts, really because we're looking at high quality and everything is reviewed by our team before we provide these solutions to our clients. So with that, I am actually going to jump into Q&A, and I think we have, yes, I can. Just give me one moment. Okay, so Jay, are you able to speak?
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Vijay, and hi. Sorry, I forgot your name. Thanks for the input. So my question is specifically for these students who use only sign language, right? So if you take Indian scenario, the deaf students don't know any other languages other than sign language. Even sign language in India is not standardized, as you know. So there are challenges, a lot of challenges with respect to STEM education, right? In general, education itself, and then STEM is definitely challenging. So being a company working for the deaf community, we do have a few solutions that that we are developing right now, which sort of automatically creates sign language from text and audio and stuff. We're trying to accommodate that for STEM as well, for helping Indian deaf community to begin with. So in that context, I definitely wanted to understand, apart from live sign interpreters in the class or special educators teaching in sign language in the class, are there any other solutions offered by Macmillan in India or in US or any other part of the world? And then also wanted to understand sort of what are the challenges and what kind of tech solutions you guys are looking for. And definitely we are open for collaboration because our tool, as I said, can interpret text and speech to sign language, which means existing documents or audio files, videos, anything can be interpreted into sign language. So would really like to have a conversation regarding specifically for the deaf using sign language, right? For STEM and in general education. So any inputs in that regard would definitely help us.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, when we're working with students who are deaf or hard of hearing, the resource that we see them using the most are actually less sign language interpreters in the classroom and more the use of CART. Now I have to remember what it stands for. Communication, access, real-time translation. I think I got that right. So this is basically like real-time transcription in the classroom, and that has been incredibly helpful for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. We have seen some classrooms integrate sign language interpreters. And we've certainly explored the possibility of sort of in-video sign language interpretation for training videos and educational videos that are within their platforms. But ultimately, our audience has really pushed back and said that it's closed captioning that they're looking for understanding what's happening in the videos. And of course, for people with visual impairments, we also include an audio description track that has more detailed information. I think there are probably a lot of opportunities there in the deaf and hard of hearing community to make STEM more accessible. Right now, I'm not sure I know of any dedicated efforts either in the US or abroad, although I would more likely know about the US.
Thanks, Rachel, for that answer. So the point I got from that answer is closed captions are the most preferred way for the deaf and hard of hearing, right? At least in the US scenario.
Yeah, with the community that we've been working with, we hear the need for closed captioning. Within the classroom, when we talk to people working at universities, often there is CART translation. So somebody who's doing live transcription.
Yeah, got it. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Jay. So yes, do we have more questions from the audience?
I was that thorough.
We have one more.
Oh, I see Ganesh's hands raised.
Is Ganesh, I think you can unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello. Yes.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Vijay. Thanks, Rachel, for this insightful session. I just stumbled upon this webinar link, and I was lucky to, come here and have a detailed talk with you guys. I have a question which is of two folds. One is for Rachel. In spectrum of disabilities, what is the next problem statement you're trying to tackle? We saw a snippet. I think there was a screenshot where you mentioned you cannot solve all the problems altogether. So you spoke about alternate text, contrast, and another one. So what is the next thing you're trying to solve? Maybe from Macmillan side. And Vijay, I wanted to know if you can just give out some problem statements to the audience, like what is the next problem which your company is going to solve, or what is the AI-based futuristic thing you're trying to solve right now?
Absolutely.
Thank
Rachel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I have two that immediately come to mind, and they're sort of in very different areas of STEM accessibility. So the first is in geography and geology. And what we're trying to, the problem statement that we're trying to break down is understanding how maps are used in geology and geography classrooms. And using that information to better provide map-based information to students with disabilities. So we often try to convey a lot of information within a single map, whether that map is static or interactive. And what we're trying to break down is how can we make it easier for students to navigate that information and to access that information. So that's one of the problems that we're looking at right now. And then the other piece has to do with molecular drawing. And so we have this really cool, really fun tool for molecular drawing that we've been trying to figure out how to make it more accessible for students. And it's sort of working in the reverse, which is something that I hate to do. So we're trying to fix something that we already have out there. But the problem that we're trying to solve is students need to be able to understand how to construct molecules, the elements of molecules, the how to construct chemicals. And generally this is done with those stick and ball figures. Again, I'm an English major. I hope stick and ball is the correct.
Yes.
So we want that available in a virtual environment. We want that available to students who are doing distance learning. We want it available to students who don't have access to the physical models. And how can we do that in such a way that students can manipulate these models and build these models and bring these elements together, no matter the assistive technology they're working with.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just to add on, I'm from IIT Delhi, and we are working in certain space where it is more tactile in nature, and it is not digital per se, but maybe remotely connected with the first problem statement which you try to share, maps and geography, but it is more to do with the vision impairment. So I think Vijay might get hold of the site and pass it on to you. So it's it is available on open source.
Yeah, Ganesh, I'd be happy to reach out to you. I think that you signed up, so I'm happy to reach out to you and get that information.
Sure.
And to answer your question briefly is, so we are right now, have been focused on dealing with images, actually getting to a place where we are able to automate a very large percentage of images. So looking through the lens of AI and deep learning, looking really through the lens of vision technologies to make sure that we are able to create very accurate image descriptions for a variety of images. And we are able to, again, do this across multidisciplines. We have come a long way in the last several years. and that's one of our key focus areas. We're also looking at documents. Similarly, right now, our tool does a really great job with PDFs, and then we are able to convert from one format to another. So really enabling digitization and easy accessibility for all document formats. We also have been building an automation solution for video closed captions. And again, there are many tools doing it out there, but the way or the approach that we are taking will really accelerate and then make it a really high quality output. And then we're also looking at other innovations around, looking at diversity and inclusion, content issues, and then being able to, again, bring AI and some of our innovations to really identify what these issues are so we can actually tackle them along with, again, human experts. That's a big part of our effort, is to combine it with expertise where needed. So that's a short answer to your question.
Thank you, Vijayshree.
Thank you. And then Steve, I think we have a question from you. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Steve.
I have a cold, so I apologize for my voice. I was going to mention for the gentleman who was speaking about people or students who are deaf and using CART, that what we recommend is using live transcribe in cases where CART is not affordable. And I'm not suggesting that live transcribe replace CART services. I'm just suggesting that there are many instances where an educational institution or a tutor or many other situations cannot afford to pay for CART services. Rather than doing nothing, we recommend that the live transcribe app be loaded onto an Android device, which would be free. iOS, I believe there's a monthly charge for the service. And then connect that mobile device to an overhead projection system that projects the captions to a screen at the front of the auditorium or room. And that has proved to be very helpful. And that's all I wanted to mention. I think my voice is going to be giving out. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Steve. That is a great suggestion, and I hope you feel better soon.
Great. Yes, thanks so much, Steve. And yeah, thank you for all your questions. And Charles, thank you for adding that resource. And for anyone who missed it on chat, Charles said, I would recommend for the deaf innovations would be to reach out to Gallaudet University here in the US, and he's included a link there. And as we are about a minute from closing time, I just want to quickly check if there are any other questions. If not, I want to just leave my contact information here. You can reach out to us at contact@continualengine.com. We are happy to reach back out to Rachel if you have questions and direct you to her. And please connect with us if there are ideas, suggestions. We're definitely looking to expand our own awareness and our own ideas for what we can perhaps present in future webinars. But thank you all so much. And thanks so much, Rachel, for your time again. And
thank you.
Talking to you soon.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.